internet and digital presence. And so I just will introduce Siobhan by sharing a few pages, right? Beginning with, this is one of the things we all know her for in the field. And this history of the native web, I have often asked students to look at. So this is a lovely place to begin. You can find more about Siobhan specifically in her own words here, and her university and her work there. And her recent book then, Dawnland Voices, which also I have had students go to this when they are working with the book, but also to see especially the tribal nations. I like the way that they are here. Now I'm not going to, oh there, I can scroll down. I don't want to mess with your computer. But you can see the ways that combinations of images and information and the way things are networked and connected are very important. And that's, I think, the thing that, as a scholar, Siobhan has really helped us all do better. And just for fun, we have Siobhan, last year at NLA in Vancouver, carrying the Dontre Hamilton sign at the Black Lives Matter protest. So all of us here in Milwaukee who know the name Dontre Hamilton, Siobhan carried that sign for us. So I thought, in terms of the digital traces, this was relevant. So I introduced Siobhan. You're funny.
Yes, so stuff goes on the internet and it never goes away. That's the rule here. And I actually thought you were going to mock me for...
I would never mock you. I would never mock you.
Because the links that Meg showed you are actually old, and I've been leaving quite a digital trail as I update this website and change the website. It's iteration after iteration, so I'm actually going to show you some newer versions. But I just wanted to situate the talk about Wikipedia a little bit first. So this is a book that came out last year. It's called Dawnland Voices, an anthology of Indigenous New England literature, and it's the first anthology of literature from this region, and it's almost 700 pages. So I did that, and then I worked with 11 tribal editors. The thing is organized by tribal nation, and I worked with 11 tribal editors who selected the texts for each tribal nation, edited them, chose them, annotated them. And then I've been talking to the tribal editors for a while about how to extend the work of the print book to some kind of online platform, and so this is the one that we've arrived at now at dawnlandvoices.org. And we have Dawnland Voices 2.0, which is a new literary magazine for emergent writers from the region, and then the Indigenous New England digital collection that Meg showed you is just up there. So I show these just to let you know why I started doing this work with Wikipedia and my students, because I don't think they should have to wait until they're graduate students to get involved with professors' research and actually start producing new knowledge. So that was one of the impulses behind the Wikipedia project. A lot of the links that I'm going to be talking about today are in an article in this book that first appeared on the web called Web Writing. And one of your colleagues, Amanda Seligman, has been involved with this. So it's an article called Indigenizing Wikipedia, Student Accountability to Native American Authors on the World's Largest Encyclopedia. So if you've already read this book, this article, I apologize, you can just check your email or whatever you need to do for the rest of the talk, because I'm going to be re-summarizing some of what's happened in this article here. But if you're looking for links to things that I'm talking about, you can find them pretty readily in this article. So I have a Wikipedia profile. I'm user S Senior, and Wikipedia actually recommends that you edit anonymously, but I chose not to. I chose to let people know who I am. And I keep a list of articles that my students and I have contributed to Wikipedia. So these are Native American writers from New England who were not previously represented on the site. Right? So that's the thing that I've been working with students about. So having students write for Wikipedia is not new or original. Lots of people do it, including your colleague Amanda, who does it in her history classes to really good effect. But the idea of having students create new biographies for living writers who are not previously represented on the site is a little bit new, and it has specific challenges associated with it. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what it's like to teach writing through Wikipedia, because I teach in an English department, I teach literature. And I will say that I've had tremendous success with having students write for Wikipedia. They really want to get it right, they really get proud of the results, generally speaking. Not every single one of them, but they're generally proud of the results. There are some problems. You all know this. There are lots of problems with Wikipedia. The one I'm going to talk about today is Wikipedia's notability requirement. It has a requirement that your subject must be notable, and I'll talk about what that means to them. But aside from that, these assignments have been really successful. Students, they get new skills in writing, and they also get a much better grasp of the writing process. And I'm really invested in teaching writing process. The native authors, too, because these are all living authors that I've had the privilege to meet through working on the Anthology, they're really gratified to be represented on the website. They're really happy to have students work with them, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to sort of vet what is going up on the web about them. And the best part of it as a writing teacher is that I got to play the pedagogical role of facilitator rather than gatekeeper, which I really like. It's the way I'd rather like to think of myself. It's not the way they think of me. They think of me as the person who assigns them the grades, but it shifts my relationship to students in teaching writing when I have them write for Wikipedia. So students and professors, I find, have lots of misconceptions about Wikipedia. It is actually not the case that absolutely anybody can put absolutely anything on Wikipedia. Wikipedia actually has some surprisingly stringent standards for what is going to go up there, and they boil it down, in the interest of recruiting new writers, they boil it down to what they call 5 pillars. Right? Wikipedia is an encyclopedia, so students are not supposed to be putting their own primary research or their opinions on Wikipedia. Wikipedia is supposed to be neutral. That is obviously a contested notion. Wikipedia is free content that anyone can use, edit, and distribute. Editors should treat each other with respect and civility. Ha-ha, if you've ever been on Wikipedia, you know that this does not always happen. And then Wikipedia has no firm rules. I mean, Wikipedia does have these guidelines, but I'm going to show you some examples where on a talk page, clusters of editors wind up actually adjudicating what the norms are for Wikipedia. So if you didn't know this, every hour, thousands of volunteers actually scour Wikipedia looking for things to edit and things to change. They accept or reject articles, they clean them up to meet basic editorial standards, and they may flag them. So you've seen these flags if you've spent any time on the sites. There might be a flag that says this article is a stub, please help Wikipedia improve it. There might be a flag that says this is not a neutral point of view in this article, please help Wikipedia improve it. Wikipedia also uses robots, right, that find really common errors and mistakes, or even clean up things like, high school students think it's cute to go in there and put profanity on the web, right? And it's actually a very common exercise, and there are robots to sort of flush that out. There's also this thing that they call the 3 Revert rule. If Meg and I get in a fight on Wikipedia about a particular article, we go back and forth 3 times, somebody will lock it down. So that we can't do that all day long about the Justin Bieber article, for example. There are some, you've probably noticed this, there are some articles, like the one for Barack Obama, that are on permanent lockdown, more or less, on Wikipedia. Not anyone can go in there and mess with it. I was teaching a Women's Studies 101 class this past semester, and the article for feminism is actually not able to be edited by just any old freshman writer going through there. So. You all know this, Wikipedia is not unproblematic. It does contain lots of errors, and it does contain some frankly appalling prose. It does have bizarre imbalances in coverage, so if you can look at something like the article on Cherokee Chief Wilma Mankiller versus the article on Justin Bieber, and you'll see who gets more coverage, and you can ask yourself, why that is, but it's not the unscrupulous free-for-all that some people imagine it to be. So it's my position that we should be teaching students how Wikipedia works. We should be teaching them how to use it, and we should also be teaching them, this is just my opinion, how to improve it. I tell them, you are educated citizens. If you see something wrong on Wikipedia, you should go fix it. So Wikipedia does encourage school and university projects. They have a bunch of online tutorials that are targeted specifically for college students. And there are hundreds of classes all over the world, actually, that have engaged their students in writing for them. Historians are especially good at this. The historians have used student writing on Wikipedia to help students reflect on the profession's own standards. comparing the practices of popular and crowdsourced history, for example, to the standards of professional historians, especially when it comes to this notion of neutrality or a neutral point of view. Martha Saxton, who teaches Wikipedia in a women's history class at Amherst College, tackles a more global problem with Wikipedia, though. She says, to the extent that popular judgment determines what history gets produced in this format, the significance of women's role in it and gender as a discourse or a method of analysis are likely to be devalued. And I, too, was concerned about Wikipedia's failures in coverage, namely its lack of representation of Native American authors, and especially its representation of Native American authors from New England, which is not peculiar to Wikipedia. But before my students and I started this project, there were 3 Native American authors from New England on the site, and they were the only three that even people in Native American studies know. It's Samson Occam, William Apes, who are 2 early ministers from Connecticut, and then Joseph Bruchac, who's an incredibly prolific Abenaki writer working today. And those are the only 3. That's the big trifecta. So we've improved that. By now, there are lots of movements, you may be aware of this, and wikithons, which we may try to do a little bit of in here before the reception, wikithons to try to improve the content of Wikipedia. And one of the first was called Too Few. So in Wikipedia, you will find these, meetups where people interested in improving coverage of a certain topic can gather virtually to say what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, and when they're going to do it. So one of the first was Too Few, Feminists for Feminists Engage Wikipedia. And it was started by Moya Bailey, who's a DH, Digital Humanities Scholar, who set March 15th, 2013 as a day for scholars and students to get together face-to-face as well as virtually to edit the site in conjunction with some of the edit-a-thons that are run by that camp. If you're familiar with digital humanities at all, that camp is the humanities and technology camp. They happen all over the country. I strongly recommend them if you're interested in doing anything tech in your class, or you're scared of tech in your class, like go check out of that camp. They're really, really fun. So they had this Wikipedia meetup page, and Moya Bailey actually also got coverage in the Chronicle of Higher Ed and even Al Jazeera, where she called for Wikipedia to better reflect the diversity of our living. So since then, there are lots of other editing initiatives. Adeline Coe and Rupika Risam do a rewriting Wikipedia project from a post-colonial perspective. And these scholars are responding to the increasingly visible reports, including the Wikimedia Foundation's own reports, indicating that only about 10% of contributors to the site are women, right? So the standard contributor to Wikipedia is your 17-year-old boy, and it's reflected in the content, right? That bias shows up in the content. So these projects are also scrutinizing Wikipedia's allegedly objective criteria. So Coe and Risam say those neutrality criteria depend, quote, on the weight of already existing knowledge which post-colonial studies writers have systematically argued is racially and culturally charged. To subscribe to these concepts uncritically has the effect of reproducing uneven social forms of privilege against groups that deserve to be represented. So as my students found, when it comes to Native American authors, this notability benchmark on Wikipedia is especially problematic. Now, I teach these articles in a class called Native American Literature in the 21st Century. And I get mainly junior and senior English majors, the occasional journalism major, the occasional history major. And I wanted to have them first write for this site, right, the Dawnland Voices 2.0 site. Because again, I want them to be able to participate in the production of new knowledge and be engaged in my research. But it started to occur to me that it might be useful to have them run biographies of various New England Native writers through Wikipedia first, before putting them on this site. And I will tell you why. Professorial maligning of Wikipedia aside, right? They all know we're not allowed to use Wikipedia. Everybody tells us not to use Wikipedia. The dirty secret is that I actually do not know too many professors who actually require the kinds of writing rigor required by Wikipedia. That was an embarrassing and shocking revelation to me. I have colleagues who still refuse to believe it. It was a surprise for my students, but the students found that there was just no way to grade grub or plea bargain their way out of very basic editorial standards on this site. So, for example, if they committed mechanical errors, an anonymous editor comes along and corrects those. If they commit too many, an anonymous editor is going to come along and take your site down. If their research is thin, they will be mortified, this is a real example, to find some 17-year-old in Turkey at 2 in the morning declaring their article a stub, or someone with a silly handle, an example I'm going to show you very shortly, nominating their work for deletion altogether. So in the end, for me, one of this assignment's greatest boons was that I got to be the friend, not the bad guy. They got to come to me and say, how do we fix this? And in fact, when I do this with students on Wikipedia, they are in much closer contact with me than they are on their other papers. I think they're very accountable, they're very, very motivated. Probably because Wikipedia is so public, right, and so immediate. It can take me days to reply to a student's blog entry or a student's essay, but it can take a Wikipedia editor like 20 minutes. It can happen within the space of a class that someone is responding to their writing. More profoundly, my students have responded to the intensely collaborative nature of Wikipedia as a whole, and I take this quotation because I think it is so sweet and charming. One student said, I often feel that I am just taking from the internet and rarely being a contributor. Isn't that sweet? Now I can put something up online that is credible, academic, and a contribution to the World Wide Web. She's a little bit of an outlier, but it's still very sweet. So I give students a clear sequence of steps that are documented in that article that I showed you. One, they have to sign up for a Wikipedia account and take the tutorials. And I don't mean this lightly at all. I am still very surprised that these so-called digital natives very often lack basic digital literacy. And I consider signing up for an account and taking a tutorial and typing into Google, how do I accomplish this task, to be basic web literacy. And a lot of undergraduates, at least my undergraduates, maybe different here in Milwaukee, do not know how to do those things, and they're stymied by those things. So this is basic web literacy 101. Wikipedia gives you a sandbox, and so the second step of the assignment is that students have to start drafting their article in their sandbox. I don't just sic them on native authors. I don't say, just go out there and find a native author and write about them. I actually broker this pretty carefully before the semester starts. I contact native authors in advance. I kind of have in mind, Meg and I will talk about this a little later, I think, with Alanis King, but I kind of have in mind whether the author might pass Wikipedia's notability benchmark before I set students up writing about an author who might not pass. And I make sure that I've talked to the author and that they know what's coming and that they're willing to actually be in email contact with the student. So they draft their article in the sandbox and they send it to me first, and when I approve it, they send it to the writer, actually, for approval. Something with which some Wikipedia editors are not entirely keen, but for ethical reasons, I consider it to be something that we do. The other thing, because I teach English majors and they all think they're afraid of tech, this turns out to be a really good thing, right? Wikipedia uses really rudimentary markup. So once they get over the hurdle of Wikipedia's markup, they realize that they could do a few more tech things than they realized, and they feel a little bit empowered. It also gives them a very powerful lesson in professional writing process. So some graduating senior English majors, again, this might just be UNH, become rather accustomed to writing their papers the night before they are due. And again, plea bargaining to get a certain grade, you cannot do that on Wikipedia, right? You can't do it. You have to, get feedback. You have to spend more time on your paper. So those who are in those maybe bad habits found some of their articles, in fact, proposed for deletion. They may have done poorly on the assignment because they skipped some of these interim low-stakes assignments that I set up, thinking, I'll just do it the night before. But they were critically important parts of the research, writing, and revision. Now, proposed deletion is not the only thing that happens to students when they're writing for Wikipedia, but it's the scariest thing for a student when they've drafted an article and somebody says at 2 in the morning, we're going to take your article down. And it's also the one that reveals the most, I think, about the politics of indigenizing Wikipedia. Some of my students wrote what I thought were actually quite competent and quite good articles that were nevertheless proposed for deletion on the grounds that their subjects did not meet Wikipedia's notability benchmark. So now, to be considered notable enough to pass muster with Wikipedia, a subject has to have received significant coverage in reliable, published secondary sources. Like many college professors, Wikipedians favor newspaper and magazine articles, and especially scholarly books and journals. But in my own opinion, telling students that something published by Harvard University Press is immediately better than anything published by, say, a tribal website is not actually teaching them critical thinking, right? It's not actually teaching them to evaluate those sources. As the famous historian Roy Rosenzweig once said years ago, the general panic about students' use of the internet sources is overblown. You can find bad history in the library. So this is one of the things that my students ran up against as they delved further and further into this topic. So this, John Christian, this is the talk page, and Wikipedia will archive debates that happen about particular articles, which is an incredibly useful thing to have. So John Christian Hopkins is a Narragansett journalist, and this article was written by 2 journalism majors working together who I would say were rather modestly engaged with the course content up until this point, right? Up until this happened. At 2 in the morning, somebody flagged their article for deletion, and this person named Duff Beer for me said, this is not a notable author, the awards are not major, lacks coverage about Hopkins in independent, reliable sources, mix of primary local puff and non-reliable sources. I found nothing better. And then some kindly other Wikipedia editor named S. Senior. So here's a little secret about writing for Wikipedia. I don't want to call it gaming the system, but if you're working with students and they are running into trouble, it is possible to get involved in the talk and to enlist other Wikipedia editors to get involved in the talk. It won't solve the problem, but it can sometimes have a different result, which I'll show you here. So this kindly editorial person, S. Senior, says, I guess I would respectfully disagree that his awards are not major. Native American Journalist Association awards are in fact quite prestigious. And then I did actually out myself. I will add that I'm teaching a university course with a component, and this article was written by 2 students. Thank you so much. And Duff Beer, for me, doesn't care. He says a Google search for Native American Journalist Awards comes up with one unrelated result. I hope you mark, I love, sometimes Wikipedia editors will tell me how to grade my students. I hope you mark based on the quality of your students' work. He doesn't know how to use an apostrophe. Instead of their chosen subject's notability, unless that's an important part of the class. Now, then somebody else named Viz Jim. So, and disclosure that's not actually in the published article, I know Viz Jim. I actually had not met him face to face at the time of this thing, but we met on Wikipedia. Is that funny? And so I asked Viz Jim, who has done a lot of editing about Native American literature on Wikipedia. I said, hey, Viz Jim, do you mind going and taking a look at this article? And so Viz Jim said the search you carried out had an inaccurate spelling, Duff Beer, so it's not surprising it would return 0 results. And then here's what I got. Duff Beer wants to fight about him. And then the most interesting thing comes down here from Viz Jim, where Viz Jim says, keep the article. I know this argument isn't always popular, but numbers matter when discussing Native American writers. Hopkins is significant because he is one of very few Narragansett writers and one of very few opinion columnists from any tribe at the time his career began. As noted as Sage's Encyclopedia of Journalism, Wikipedia criteria are usually good but can distort the argument when it comes to very small tribal nations. Narragansett have less than thousands. So remember at the outset I said, they've got these 5 pillars, and one of them is that Wikipedia has no strict rules. This is an example of Wikipedia editors adjudicating what the rules might look like and how the rules might be flexible. Duff Beer, for me, doesn't get it. He says it's not a popular argument because it's fundamentally flawed. Duff Beer doesn't know how to spell either. Being Native American is not part of any Wikipedia notability policy. He's judged the same as others. Would you apply the same argument to a town of less than 3,000, to a street of less than 3,000? And Viz Jim says no, because those are not tribal nations with tribal sovereignty. So this actually, what happens in a case like this is that sometimes somebody in Wikipedia with power to actually make the decision will intervene one way or the other. So we actually got this article saved. It's for lack of consensus or lack of agreement. There was no simple consensus. There was a great learning experience for students. Very few things on Wikipedia are permanent, so I told students it wasn't the end of the world if their articles were flagged or proposed for deletion. And I did grant favorable grades to students who conducted their research scrupulously. Thank you, Duff Beer, for the pedagogical advice. And polished their drafts assiduously, no matter what the outcome was among Wikipedians. Perhaps the most vexing notability debate came over another writer named Trista Meyer. And again, this article was proposed for deletion, but then saved, and actually saved after the student graduated. So she graduated not knowing whether this article was going to stick or not. But Trista Meyer is an award-winning journalist from the Pequot Times and Indian Country Today. She's published a memoir, an anthology about Indian adoptees, a book of poetry. But here's the rub. Her books are mainly self-published, and she has not gotten very much coverage by sources that are not in some way related to her. So this is the thing that I'm worried about with Alanis King. So at the end of the semester, and well after the student had graduated, this article, which was as well researched as any that the students had produced, had still been declined. So I will say this, Wikipedians are justifiably concerned about individuals and other entities like, your garage band or your university for that matter. Go check your university's webpage. It can be very illuminating, and Wikipedia frowns on this, but a lot of universities have somebody on staff who is either outright paid to monitor social media or is subtly in there massaging your university's webpage. And so sometimes I like to go onto my university's Wikipedia page and just put, facts, right? Facts about how our funding has been cut, or facts about the reality on the ground, but things that the university doesn't like. But so Wikipedia doesn't like people using Wikipedia for self-promotion, right, or institutions. But these editorial debates over Native American public figures let students see that this concern can also have racial and political overtones. In the DeMeyer case, at least some editors appear to be sensitive to the proposition that notability itself is not an apolitical concept. And here was another powerful lesson for students that in whatever professional writing situation you find yourself, your editor is not always going to be objective. Your editor is not always going to be well-informed. Your editor is not always going to be even that smart. It can happen. So editors have their own agendas, no matter how neutral or professional they may claim to be. Trista Meyer was one of a handful of Native authors I was able to bring into class. And by the time she visited, students had some insight into the forces that keep Indigenous literature and Indigenous issues invisible. They were impressed and surprised by her career, her productivity, her connections, and her knowledge. Their surprise is only partly attributable, I think, to their youth or to their location at a public university in New Hampshire, because settler colonial society has to do a great deal of work to keep Indigenous presence invisible. So I regularly require students to follow Native American issues on platforms like Twitter and Facebook, issues like Idle No More or Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. And when they do this, they see, to their great surprise, vast numbers of living Native American people in crowds, using social media, fighting for sovereignty, speaking their languages, protecting their traditional homelands, and writing. But to find these, of course, they had to bother to look, right? This stuff is not necessarily covered in the mainstream press. So just to wrap up here a little bit, and then maybe we can try some hands-on stuff. Wikipedia's notability standard actually mimics the centrifugal force exercised by traditional literary canons, even within such ostensibly canon-busting fields like Native American literary studies. In the context of a course on 21st century Native American literature, this was a critical lesson. So we started with, and I've taught this class 2 or 3 times now. The class starts with novels by Sherman Alexie and Louise Erdrich, right, who are fairly well known and published by major houses. We then move on to novels published by university presses like Craig Womack's Drowning in Fire, beautiful, beautiful novel. And then we go to poetry chapbooks by people like Miku Paul, who's part of a New England Native Authors series. And then we even read some self-published books. In one class we read a book by Joan Avant Tavares, who's a Mashpee elder who felt urgently that she needed to get her book out there, and she self-published it. So I want students to think about the politics of Native publishing and to engage with the concerns articulated by Indigenous intellectuals over non-Native aesthetic assumptions and mainstream publishing demands. These writers have found that the Indigenous texts that garner the most critical and commercial success are those that most closely mimic Western literary aesthetics. Tribal authors who express tribally specific views and values in tribally specific forms are sometimes, if not often, dismissed as too political or too hard to follow or too hard to read. So at the end of the class, most of my students are fully prepared to appreciate lesser-known Native writers from New England, but the argument made by Viz Jim that numbers matter and that tribal sovereignty is a reality worth respecting is still just beginning to be heard on Wikipedia. Crowdsourced knowledge presents itself deliberately as contingent, as always subject to further input and revision. Wikipedia changes to reflect not only changing facts, like shifting national borders, or the death of celebrity, it has the potential too to reflect shifting intellectual paradigms. In this respect, wikis are not unlike oral traditions, which in Native communities still carry enormous weight, even interestingly when it comes to preserving and maintaining literary history. There are writers who, like Joan Avant, the elder I just mentioned, who self-published her book, are revered within their tribes and beyond, whose work is read and recited at public events, who are honored at community gatherings. While they might not have attracted much attention from university-based scholars or mainstream publishers or the New York Times, Wikipedia is one space in which students with the skills, access, and time can mediate between Native authors and Wikipedia's own editors to improve the representation of Native culture and history. Joseph Riegel, who's somebody who writes about Wikipedia a lot, has argued that Wikipedia is successful not as a technology, the wiki itself, but as a culture, a community of good faith collaboration. Entering this community together, students and Indigenous authors can help ensure that Wikipedia represents the knowledge genuinely available without simply replicating those sources considered in a facile way to be notable. So that is all I have for the talk part of my talk. So we can have questions if you like, or we can try our hands at a little Wikipedia hacking since we missed our workshop at 3:30, or whatever you like. Or both. So any questions or comments, or any of you taught with Wikipedia? Jane?
Yeah, these are just, I don't think they're questions or comments. So it's listening to, I've had a bunch of experience in my own Wikipedia that doesn't really jive very well with what you're talking about, and I'm just interested to hear what you say, because I've never had a chance to talk to somebody who's not only been active, but who's really thought about Wikipedia. Let me try to be fast. So about 3 years ago, I went to a conference in which, just for the conference, and I looked at the conference brochure, which had a little bio of me, and it said, and it had these horrible things about me. And I said, and I didn't think they invited me to attack me, and I said, so I called them and I said, where did you get that? And they said, well, we got off Wikipedia. And so then I went and looked at my Wikipedia article, which I had looked at like maybe 5 years before, and 5 years before when I looked at it, it just said reasonable things about my book. It had completely changed, and it was right? And so then I got, I mean, I don't know if they got Wikipedia, but I basically asked my research assistant if they could figure out how to, I wasn't worried about the conference, I was worried about the fact that this is now
Right.
huge public knowledge that was saying things that were not true about what I had said and that were really, really negative and said terrible things about me. And it turned out to be really difficult to get it changed. And what they were saying is and it was also clear that the rules for Wikipedia had changed a lot over the last, say, 10 years. That this person or whoever had sent this thing in, that they knew the Wikipedia rules, and that they did it simply because they had citations, but the citations would be just it would just cite an entire book. So it would make a statement about me, and then it would just cite the book. Right, not a page of the book or like a quote. Right. It would say that this book said, in this book I said this. I can't even remember what it said, but it was like the worst possible version of what I said. So, and it was really hard to get that changed. And, and I had not been, I don't check my Wikipedia page. I had seen it.
Why would you?
Right, it was saying. Right, and so I was very frustrated because it seemed to me, oddly enough, that the set of rules and it was very different than it had been earlier, that they had set in a set of rules to make it harder, but that those rules in some way made it easier for people who learned the rules and wanted to say really kind of harmful things about people, right? So that they were not, and so that was my own personal experience. My other experience comes, two other pieces of experience. Someone else who's a friend of mine discovered to his horror that his Wikipedia page said on the top, something, I don't know the terms again, but it basically, be suspicious of this, we think it was written by this person and that it's a piece of self-promotion. Whereas he had not written it at all, he had no idea who wrote it, and he was horrified to think that people would think that he had sent in this article to promote himself. Right, again, like this was embarrassing because it is very public, Wikipedia. Nothing is more public, something. So, and again, this came out of whatever, what you were talking about, which is this whole new set of rules that's, yes, this has been changed, I found it is more accurate than it was. But I don't need the wall of my age. Let's start with that, but I'm not ashamed of that.
She's young.
And it's still, it's whatever. This is very good. This was 3 years ago, and I finally got people to kind of go in there and get that removed, but it really took a long time. It was very hard. And the frustrating thing was that the people who were doing this really knew, like they were very familiar with Wikipedia. They knew how to get in there. It was very hard to dislodge because they had so carefully followed the rules. So I don't know what you can tell me about that, but I feel like the fact that yes, they've got all these guidelines, but these guidelines are very formalistic. They're not really about the content. They're about following a set of procedures.
Yeah. And I don't know what to say about that.
It's
not a perfect. I will say it's not a perfect process. And in fact, in Women's Studies 101, do you want me to take this one?
I don't care.
In Women's Studies 101, actually a couple of weeks ago, I had the first year students, take some of the sources. They weren't writing new Wikipedia articles, but they were just taking sources for their current research papers and adding them to an existing Wikipedia article. One student was writing about representations of female scientists in popular culture, and she had a bunch of debates about the Big Bang Theory, if you've ever watched that show, and the women in it. And within the space of class time, somebody named Geraldo got in there and took her citations down. And I tried to respond in the editorial space. I will say that one good thing about having these articles being written in a class, and especially going through the portal that Wikipedia has now for university and school projects, is that you get a sort of Wikipedia staff member, for lack of a better, who can help guide these kinds of things and is much more generous about brokering those kinds of things. It's an honest concern I have. I have had some native writers tell me, no, I don't want to, no thanks, don't want to be part of this project. as far as I know, no author, no living person can prevent Wikipedia from posting an article about you.
Well, I was interested in the fact that you ran the things by the authors, and that's very much anti-Wikipedia policy.
Yes.
But it was because it was very, you know, because one of Wikipedia is trying to avoid people influencing their own representation. That's very, very clear.
Right.
Yeah.
Did Superman get his thing taken down?
Superman.
You said no, you said, I forget, it was just funny the way you said that. No,
Oh, the
single author could do it, so I was just wondering, could Superman do that? Could Chuck Norris do it? Chuck Norris can take down his own site on Wikipedia, right?
Good question.
Yeah.
But there certainly are online communities of anti-feminists dedicated to shaping the
Oh,
representation
yeah.
of feminists.
Oh, yeah.
Well, your idea that this is basically a lot of 17-year-old boys doing it, you know, it's scary me.
It is. Rightly
I'm
so.
not sure, like, history. See, that's what's interesting. Like, the only way I've ever been able to see what's on mine is by having my own login and then watching. I can't edit my page, but I can watch it. So anytime anybody touches it, I can see it. So you can see everything that ever happened to your page and who did it. All the way back to the first thing anyone ever did, which is interesting, you know? Or you could get a login and make it so that you can watch the page.
Right.
And then at least you would know. It would be still hard to, like the same with Kim's. Like you were saying, there was something on yours you didn't like. So that's the same thing where you can at least see it.
So it looks like maybe somebody had attributed a claim to you that you did not in fact make, and somebody got in there and tried to fix it. It looks like successfully, right? Gallup does not argue that feminists cannot be guilty of sexual harassment.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
References one
Orange
week, so-
Mike seems to.
Orange Mike.
Yeah, right. And I think I know who Orange Mike is. He lives in Milwaukee. Well, I know a guy named Mike who always wears orange, so that would be my guess.
That's him.
The news, and somebody in here might be more up on this story than I am. I need to refresh my memory about it, but there was news stories recently about Wikipedia around the Gamergate controversy,
Right.
where some feminist editors were actually banned from Wikipedia.
Really?
Um,
By Wikipedia, they banned them from editing.
So there is, there are these Wikipedia councils, that make these decisions, and in this case, around the Gamergate. And I forget what transpired exactly. Ken?
So it seems a little bit as though part of what makes Wikipedia, makes it formally, isn't so much a knowledge base as an intensity base. That is, the things that generate these long passages, or the ones that I'm sure are under Obama or George W. Bush, are about modes of intensity and intensification, and this is a locale of that. Which leads me to ask if your project isn't then not adding knowledge to the database, but trying to add an intensification of what native authors are. But admittedly, a very light one compared with, what The Simpsons predicts, right?
Yes.
So.
No, that's a really great point. I would buy that, yeah.
So I'm a librarian. I teach information literacy here at UWM, mostly to our first-year composition students. And so I was really interested in your work because you mentioned digital literacy, which it absolutely is, and critical thinking, which it absolutely is, but I want to argue that it's also teaching your students information literacy. And so, I don't know if you're all familiar, but the American Association of College and Research Libraries recently published a new framework for information literacy. And so I would argue that you're teaching your students some of these frames and the ways of thinking about the world of information and the sources of information we use. So specifically, authority is constructed and contextual. You're teaching them that. Information creation as a process. You spoke about that as part of the writing process. Research as inquiry. Scholarship is conversation. It can be a very direct conversation. Where people are arguing about sources. I mean, as a librarian, that warms my heart. I'm like, these people are arguing about sources. I mean, some of them are having terrible arguments based on a misunderstanding of the way that authority is constructed and contextual. So I was really excited, and I just wanted to add that as another way, another lens in viewing this type of work and the work that your students are engaged in.
Perfect. Thank you.
Classes are over.
I was interested in that example that you showed us with the Duck Beer for Me guy, right? Because it seems like, right, like what, and as someone who also studies native lit, it seems like a lot of what the problem is in these kind of online spaces is a complete kind of misunderstanding of the concept of tribal sovereignty.
Yeah.
And the import of tribal sovereignty, right?
Yeah.
Like, that is not even like
It's
a
not on
thing
the-
in Duck Beer for Me's mind, right? So I was wondering, have you ever looked, I mean, I just pulled up the tribal sovereignty page on Wikipedia, and I'm kind of interested to think about like these larger frameworks and how they're framed on Wikipedia, to then think about how you could use these Wikipedia pages that talk about these larger issues to make a case for the work that's being
I
done.
think that Jim links to the tribal
Did
science.
he? Okay,
Yes.
all right.
And that's a really, within the confines of Wikipedia, is a really powerful way to not shut somebody up, but Wikipedia loves internal links.
Okay.
It loves self-referential. So, of course it does. Right, just like myself. So I wanted to show something. Mike and I participated in this last year. We did a wiki-thon at the Native American Literature Symposium, and Biz Jim was part of setting this up. So he put really, I can email you this link. I think this link is not in my article. He put really good resources for Wikipedia editing, and there are a number of projects, like a project on Indigenous writing, where people keep lists of things that they would like to see in Wikipedia. And one of the things I think, and Meg can tell me if I'm wrong, one of the things I think we concluded at the end of that session was that we would like to see more global articles or more theoretical articles talking about things like sovereignty. Journals and says, yeah. Native American autobiography, First Nations people in literature. Actually, I don't see theoretical articles. Scholars, yeah.
Yeah, I
So,
did
so
the-
these are all read, so they don't exist as pages
Yes.
right now?
Correct.
And the one that I did was for Glenn Westerman.
Let's look at Meg.
See if it's still there, right? It was such a lesson to try and do one though, because immediately you get people questioning stuff, taking it out, debating, arguing with you, which in some ways, like she said, way more critical interrogation over knowledge production than you'd normally get. It's, yeah. So to make it stay, we had to, like all the things that are in color are obviously links to real, authentic, external pieces of information, so that when someone comes through and tries to say it's not notable enough, you can see, well, no, you have this, you have that. I mean, that was the task. That was interesting. I think it's also a good lesson for me when working with young students and authors, especially in the native world. There's been a lot of contention over who to publish with and how scholarly to be, and there are people whose tenure cases have hinged on whether or not their work was academic enough, and so things like when people realize that where and how and when you publish has implications, and you can do a little bit of both. Poems in your tribal newspaper are important, grandma likes them, but it may not help you be visible. It may not choose another thing that you might want.
There's somewhere in all of the apparatus for teaching Wikipedia to university students, they've got some tricks for making your articles stick, right? And one of the tricks is, you've got to have at least 3 secondary sources from so-called reliable sources. So Meg did that, right?
Well, that's something that really scares me as a librarian, because that's one person's reliable source is another person's instrumental oppression. I mean, it's really reestablishing some settler culture, is that what you call it? Yeah. Standards.
To us, it goes to show that we need to have editors and publishers and be in knowledge production in a way where we have the full chain of influence and control, not just, like you say, just one. So, if definitely, I mean, because when you look at some of these, some of those, you know, these are all ones that stayed. Some of them did have native editors at university presses and things, you know, so you know that it was actually both. But yeah.
Have you heard of the Wikipedia Feminizing Art History?
No, fabulous.
Oh, well, I just wondered if there were any, if your students were engaged in anything like this, which, so you could go one in the Wikipedia for Feminizing Art History. You could go to these wiki pages for famous artworks, and that were pulled from the traditional art history perspectives. And so there were a bunch of women who got together in a room and just did this whole Wikipedia. I think it went for 24 hours, where they just started to have conversations within these pages about these certain works. I wondered if you...
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's tons of these things all over the place, right, around topics.
Yeah.
I have one other one, which I've always found very interesting for the sort of substance of Wikipedia, which is a colleague of ours here, Nathaniel Stern, did a piece called Wikipedia Art, which was about itself. It was a Wikipedia page referring to itself as an artwork. And before they released it, they released the idea to the press, and so the press wrote about it, so they were able to embed these citations.
Oh, very clever.
And Wikipedia took it down after a long debate, and then the press went crazy about that, and so then they reintroduced it with all these citations.
Yes.
Wikipedia still can't accept it as a thing because it puts their whole identity as
Yes.
cited.
That's brilliant. That's gaming the system.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so they, of course, then put all of that on their website, which you're looking at. And then Wikipedia threatened to sue them for using their name, which then got them more press.
Yeah. It's you know, Web 2.0. It's exciting, but it's not problematic, and it's not unrisky. You know, if a native writer does say something untoward and it gets reported in the press, somebody could go add it to that Wikipedia article, and it can't, like, if you actually said that women could not be considered sexual, you know, if you actually said it, it could not be taken down, although it sounds like you had trouble getting it taken down even though you didn't say it, so. Yeah, it's not unproblematic. Well, I see one laptop. I mean, we can hang. Oh, I see two laptops.
We're following along.
I mean, do you want to try writing one for Alana?
You can see if you think it would work. I mean, she's somebody that we recently had commissioned to come here to write a play about a woman in history who we felt was not well enough known. So you talk about your compound invisibility.
And then there were articles on the UW.
There were articles about the play on the website. She is herself in other entries on Wikipedia.
That's good.
Yeah, exactly.
That's good.
So there's,
Yeah.
people mentioned her as the founder of a certain theater, you know. So
It looks like she's got some news articles, as well as an entry in another encyclopedia.
right. Yeah.
Which is good. So I usually tell students to go first here, like, is there news?
Right.
Because Wikipedia likes that, and I also tell them to go here. She might not be here except, well,
No, those are her. Those are,
yeah,
yeah.
right.
These
So
are
that
mentions
looks like
of her in those, yeah.
scholarly book that references her. Perfect for Wikipedia. You can make that Yeah, well, I'm happy to hang around for another half hour and do a little hackathon, if you want. Kenny, you're the boss, I don't know.
Well, we've got some refreshments set up upstairs, so we could, if people could look over people's shoulders, we could do that up there as well. So.
Sure. Okay.
All right, so I'd like to invite everybody up to the.
So now I should
ninth
watch
floor, so.
Jane's page board too.